First story. The doll. Poznan, Poland, 1984. A mother takes her daughter to the flea market. While walking through the aisles, the little girl notices a pretty porcelain doll in good condition, with 2 fingers of her hand raised. She asks her mother for it, who asks the seller for the price and decides to buy it after haggling over the price. Back home, the little girl begins to play with her new doll with blue eyes, blonde hair, and dressed in a pink flannel dress. She holds a pretty pink parasol in one hand, but cannot hold anything in the other because of her 2 raised fingers. Her mother has to go back to run an errand and decides to leave her daughter alone for an hour, telling her to continue playing in her room. The little girl plays quietly for a few minutes until she hears the phone ring and goes down to the dining room to answer it. She doesn't have time to speak before a muffled voice tells her directly, "Don't play with your doll after midnight," just before hanging up. Frightened, the little girl returns to her room and puts her doll in the bottom of her toy box. A few moments later, her mother came home and found her daughter sitting in a corner of her room. She sees that the little one is not doing well, but she doesn't tell her about the phone call or about her doll. A week passes without any problems until the following Saturday. The mother is invited to a party and, as she has not found a babysitter, she decides to leave her little one alone at home, asking her if she agrees. The little girl agrees and promises to go to bed early, so she leaves by car and spends the night at this famous party. When she comes home at 1 a.m. in the morning, she decides to go to her daughter's room to see if she is sleeping. She opens the door and screams. Her daughter is lying on the ground, her throat slit. The toy box is open and next to it is the porcelain doll. Despite an investigation, the police found no trace of a break-in or of the murderer. The mother, mad with grief, decides to resell her little girl's doll, which now has 3 fingers up. Second story. There is one place left. Marseille, France, 2021. Franck and a group of friends rented an Airbnb in a building in Marseille. They spent their first evening at the apartment eating, drinking, and recounting old memories. Quite late in the night, the group of friends decided to go to bed, but Frank was tossing and turning in his bed and could not fall asleep. He suddenly heard the sound of a car braking suddenly at the bottom of the building and decided to look out of the balcony. He saw 5 young people pile into a black hearse from which loud music was blaring. The driver rolled down his window and revealed a grey and frightening face on which a driver's cap rested. He looked at Frank and said to him, "There is one place left." He waited a minute, leaving the engine running, but Frank didn't move from the balcony. Then the car drove off and disappeared into the night. The next day, Frank told the story to his friends, who all found it very strange and told him that he probably had dreamed it. Frank, however, remained convinced of what he saw. They went a little later to the city centre and up the street from the building, and they noticed shards of glass on the ground in front of a grocery store. Frank asked the grocer what had happened, and he replied that there was an accident in the night. A hearse full of young people had crashed into a wall, killing all 5 passengers instantly. Frank's friends didn't seem to understand how much this news disturbed him, and he decided to return to the apartment alone, leaving them to go for a walk. He stayed in the apartment for an hour or 2, and then decided to go back out for some fresh air to clear his mind. He called the elevator, and it stopped on his floor. The door opened, and he saw that it was already almost full. Among the faces, there was one who called out to him, a man with a grey face who wore a driver's cap and who said to him, "There is one place left." Frank remained paralysed on the landing as the elevator door closed and continued its descent. He suddenly heard screams and then a huge noise coming from downstairs. He rushed down the stairs and realised that the elevator had failed and had crashed into the basement. Frank called the emergency services so that they could quickly help the occupants of the elevator. Unfortunately, everyone inside was dead and the firefighters took out the different bodies one by one. Frank watched with fear in his stomach, but he didn't see the man with the grey face and the driver's cap anywhere. Third story. A Night in the Cabin. Alps, France, 2018. Francois is an experienced hiker, so booking a week's vacation in the Alps by himself seems like the best possible plan for him. In the middle of his summer 2018 week, Francois has planned a big day of hiking, perhaps too ambitious. When he starts to turn back halfway through his journey, he realizes that the sun is beginning to slowly descend towards the horizon. He quickens his pace, hoping to reach his car before sunset. But despite his increasingly rapid pace, Francois quickly finds himself in the middle of the night, still far from his destination, and to make matters worse, he does not recognize the path he took at the start. He continues walking, yet cannot find his way, and soon realizes that he will have to spend the night alone in the mountains. After a few long minutes of walking, he comes across an old wooden cabin, lost in the middle of nowhere. He knocks on the door, but no one answers, so he decides to enter and finds a single bed in the middle of this small, square hut. Francois tells himself that he can use the bed and that should the owner return in the night, he will explain why he settled in. He lies down and tries to fall asleep, but the sounds of the forest and the sense of isolation prevent him from slipping into sleep easily. He looks around and sees several paintings on the walls of the cabin, all depicting quite frightening faces, with forced, almost inhuman smiles. These faces all seem to be watching him with their chilling smiles, and Francois finally decides to close his eyes and focus on something else to fall asleep. The next morning, Francois wakes up in the cabin and realizes with horror when he opens his eyes that there are no paintings on the walls, only several windows.